Hello, everybody. Welcome into Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jeremy Lapidus. Today is an awesome day in the world of sports because week one of college football is here. There are a bunch of games that kick off in just 2 hours from now. There's 3 big games today. All of them are at 8. We're going to go over the big 3 from Thursday before getting into some fantasy talk as we are ranking the top 24 quarterbacks for fantasy football this year. Also, updates from around the rest of the NFL. Jacoby Brissett has been named the starter in New England. We'll talk about that. And there's a bunch of major holdouts, 2 in San Francisco, 1 up in New York, and of course, 1 in Cincinnati. So we'll talk about all of that and more. But before we get into that, remember, if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. Or if you are on YouTube, you can use that super chat feature. If you do either of those 2 things, a message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you do have a burning question about sports, anything at all that you would like to ask, go ahead and throw that in the comments, throw it in the chat. I will get to it as soon as I possibly can. I appreciate everybody so much for sticking around, talking some sports with me here on this college football kickoff Thursday. But like I was saying, we are going to start off with that college football kickoff talk. There are 3 big games that I wanted to talk about. And there's a lot more than 3 games going on today, but the 3 games that are getting the most amount of talk are between Coastal Carolina and Jacksonville State. That game has a 3.5-point spread in favor of Jacksonville State. We'll get to that one in a bit. Also, the North Dakota State University Bison taking on Coach Prime and the Colorado Buffaloes. Colorado is favored by 10.5 in that one. We'll talk about that as well as the closest spread all night between the North Carolina Tar Heels and the Minnesota Golden Gophers. That's the one we're going to start with over here. Right now, UNC is favored by 1.5 points. This is, like I said, the closest spread of the day. And this game, I truly think, is one of the biggest toss-ups. Now, the reason we're focusing on these 3 is I think these 3 are going to be the best games of the day. They're in the primetime spot. They're getting the most attention. But starting off with UNC versus Minnesota, getting some trends out of the way as far as week 1 goes for these 2 teams. They've both been pretty good in recent history. UNC, 4-1 under Coach Mack Brown in the last 5 years since he's come back to coaching at UNC, as well as Minnesota with under PJ Fleck, who has won 8 straight games in August. So both of these teams have started out hot recently. But if you go back to historical trends, especially against the spread, both of these teams in their last 9 or 8 games have only won 2 games against the spread in the opening week. And going even further back, the Tar Heels haven't won an opener, a true road opener, since 1985. It's almost been 40 years, and they haven't won a true road opener, which is what this one is. Now, these 2 teams did play just last year in North Carolina, where the UNC Tar Heels were able to beat Minnesota 31-13. Now, these rosters are very different. Both of them have different quarterbacks. Injuries are starting to pile up on Minnesota's receivers. We're not sure exactly if they're going to play or not, or how much they will be in the game plan. As far as running backs go, that's where Minnesota is going to be at a big disadvantage. UNC is bringing back star running back Omarion Hampton, who rushed for 1,500 yards and 15 touchdowns last year, and that's going up against probably the weakest point of this Minnesota team. Now, they have a very good defense, but they gave up 150 yards per game last year. Both of these teams have new defensive coordinators, but Minnesota is returning 8 starters, and returning 8 out of 11 starters on defense on a team that gave up 150 yards a game on the ground is not going to be good. The strength of this team usually is defense, but we'll have to see. Like I said, there are a lot of things in favor of both of these teams. We look at the quarterback situation. Both of them are getting new quarterbacks. UNC is bringing in a mix. They haven't named a QB1. They expect both of their quarterbacks to start. They combined for 4 interceptions and no touchdowns last year. Obviously, comparing that to Drake May, who's in the NFL now, who we'll get into later on in this show, is a little bit unfair to do. But that is where we're at. As for Minnesota, they bring in a transfer quarterback from New Hampshire. He comes in. He actually led the league in yards per game yesterday. Not yesterday, last season. In the entirety of the FCS. So that is a huge get for them. That offense should be better. The question is the run game for Carolina going to be able to carry them? Now, they did have a receiver in Nate McCullum, who went off for 15 catches, school record, 165 yards, and a touchdown last year against Minnesota. He's supposed to be playing again. I doubt he'll get 15 catches again, but all of that is a possibility. All of that being said, I'm leaning towards UNC in this one. I think really what this difference is going to be, both of these are relying on transfer portal. They both had a lot of roster turnover. The defense, I think, for Minnesota is better. I'm leaning UNC simply because of that rushing game. Having Hampton being able to go up against a team whose defense was really not that good should take up a lot of stress off of these new starting quarterbacks, regardless of which one is in the game. Now, having two quarterbacks definitely does scare me, but I'm leaning towards UNC. I think 1.5 is about right. I think if we're taking money line, I'm taking UNC. I think I might even take Minnesota on the spread. I think this might end up being a 1-point game. Moving on to game number 2 that I wanted to cover, and this one is going to be a lot of fun. We had the North Dakota State University Bison taking on the Colorado Buffaloes. Battle of the Buffaloes here. These are two teams that are very different in the public eye. Colorado, obviously, they bring in Coach Prime. He turns that program into a superstar program, attracts plenty of really, really talented transfers. His name value, the brand value for that team, for that school, for that university, has never really been higher as far as the Colorado Buffaloes football team goes. When we look at the other side, NDSU is a stalwart, a dynasty. They've won 9 out of the last 12 FCS national championships. They have been one of the most consistent teams in all of college football, their consistency rivaling some of the Alabama dynasties that we had back in the day. It's crazy to look at how good they are. Now, they didn't win last year. That victory goes to South Dakota State, but this is still a really good team. They are built on running the football, grinding you down, keeping possession, and their defense as well. Now, the weakness for Colorado last year was the offensive line. They went out and fixed that. I think what this game is going to come down to is whether or not Colorado can force NDSU out of possession, because they are going to run the clock. They're going to juice the clock. Colorado is going to beat them with explosive plays. They have explosive players that I think on the outside in the passing game specifically, NDSU just can't cover. I think this is a game that this is going to come down to NDSU in the trenches. Is their dominant run game going to go up against a basically brand new front seven for Colorado? How that is going to fare for them. The spread is 10.5 in this one, and honestly, I think that's way too high. If you go all the way back to 2009, since then, every single week 1, an FCS school has beaten an FBS school. And this is one of these games that is primed for an upset. I think I am going to take the Bison in this one. This is one that I've been going back and forth on. I know the star power and the big playability for Colorado is one that I think could bite me in the butt on this one. But NDSU is just going to play fundamental football, hold on to the ball. I could see them having the football for 45 minutes of this game, and that's how they're going to win. They're just going to run them down, make sure they don't have time, make a couple of key stops on defense. It's going to be a run and grind game. Now, that doesn't mean the under's going to hit because both of these teams have very good offenses. Like I said, super high-powered offense out of Colorado. But this is a tough matchup for them, and I definitely think plus 10.5 is the way to go. And finally, the last game that I wanted to touch on between Sunbelt's Coastal Carolina and Jackson State University. Jackson State is in the midst of their transition period. They still, unfortunately, are not qualified for a bowl game or the playoffs, which is dumb. Everyone knows it's dumb. It really got brought into the spotlight last year with JMU when they were ranked in the top 25 and weren't able to get anywhere. It's still a dumb rule. Hopefully something like that changes. They're in their second year of transition, so next year they'll be able to get all of these perks, transition, make the playoffs, and compete for that group of 5 spot. This is going to be a really good game. Right now, Jackson State is favored by 3.5 points. I think this is going to be one of those that's going to be tight. Both of these teams were hit hard in the transfer portal. Coastal Carolina lost Grayson McCall to NC State. Obviously, Grayson McCall has been there for as long as I can remember, honestly. He feels like he's been in college football for almost 10 years, but he starting really, really young. I am going to lead towards Coastal on this one, even though it is on the road. I think they got hit a little bit less in the transfer portal, and that's what it's going to come down to. I think their ability to keep their team just a little bit more together than Jackson State was able to is going to be the difference on this one. But let me know what you think. Again, for these big 3 games, I'm taking Coastal Carolina on the money line, North Dakota State University, and North Carolina. So one favorite out of this. But let me know if I'm way off, if I'm way wrong. I'd love to hear your thoughts on any of this. But we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to focus our attention on fantasy football, talk a little bit about the quarterback situation. We covered the running backs and the wide receivers earlier on this week. Today, we're going to take a look at the quarterback position, go through all of my top 24, and of course, a couple of honorable mentions. So stick around for that. We'll be right back here on Sports by GSMC Podcast Network.